talk a little bit about how we ended up here. This actually started as a conversation between myself and Paul. I think it was in New York City, Paul, if I'm not mistaken, where
Was.
we were talking about learning. I had just started working with ETU and learning about simulations, and I was trying to get up to speed on immersive learning. And you introduced me to your app, Six, which actually tracks based on a bunch of biophysical markers, are you actually immersed in this? So before we actually start this webinar today, um, if you are out there on the webinar and you'd like to download this app, it goes on your wearable. There's a QR code here. You can download it. Paul, anything people need to know to get started with this? And then I'm going to go ahead and start mine if that's okay. And Paul, I think you're going to start yours and we're going to share the results later. But anything
Oh,
people
yeah.
need to know before we get started?
No, works with about 15 different wearables and is free. So you can actually measure the value your brain's getting from this experience in real time by using the app. So this gets rid of the BS detector, right? Are we really full of crap, or is this actually a valuable experience? You'll find out yourself privately on your own phone.
Awesome. All right. So hopefully everybody's downloaded that and then kick it off so you can kind of track, are you immersed or not? Are you distracted? We'll see. And then we'll see how, we'll compare, maybe Paul and I will compare results at the end as well. So after we connected in New York City, you offered to really bring me up to speed on immersion, immersive learning, et cetera. And since then we've had several conversations. And so I think the way that we should do this conversation today is just to continue that conversation that we've been having, but have it with a bigger audience, I guess. And so let me start with a statement that I think everybody will believe is true, which is that when we talk about corporate learning, corporate training, most corporate learning is repetitive, forgettable, and it's pretty disconnected from performance. And I wonder if you could just tell us, both anecdotally, but also from the science and the research, the neuroscience of it that you've done, why is this the case? Why is this statement probably true?
Yeah, I think two pieces of background, and I'll address that. One is that I'm using immersion with a capital I as a term of art for a 1 second frequency convolution of neurologic signals that come out of the brain that we can capture from the cranial nerves using software. So the QR code we put up. So I'm using immersion in a very special way as opposed to a casual way, because these combination signals don't exist in nature, at least the combination doesn't exist. So we developed this technology with funding from the Department of Defense and some other agencies to do a single thing: accurately predict what people would remember and act on. And we spent millions of dollars and 20 years of research to identify how the brain values social emotional experiences. So I think one reason that most corporate training programs are honestly boring and not very useful is that they are, one, not measured in terms of, are they creating sufficient value? So because the brain is so energy hungry, it wants to just return to baseline, just idle. And when we see this neurologic investment I've called immersion, this high value created for the human, it goes, oh, holy crap, this is really important to me. I'm going to expend a lot of metabolic energy absorbing this. So first is, if you're using the guess that this is going to work method, you're probably going to miss the mark a lot of times, number one. Number two, I think, there are three dimensions, Phil, we have talked about, in which corporate trainers and training programs can be measured and improved. One is, are learners ready to absorb the information? So in the Six app, there's a measure of psychological safety, a physiologic measure. If you're tired, hungry, you have to pee, your feet hurt, whatever, we can't do that. So we're all overeducated, Phil,
Yeah.
right? And we
Yeah.
can sit in our butts for 8 hours a day, but our brain doesn't work on that. So use, as you remember, use by Accenture over the last 6 years, which spends $1 billion on corporate training, has shown that people cannot stay neurologically immersed without a change in task for more than 20 minutes. So Accenture has broken down their training in 20-minute segments, right? No more than 20 minutes. So that's the first, is, are people ready to learn? The second is how I structure that training, like 20-20-20. That's a way to think about breaking up that hour.
Yeah. We're going to talk
And
about that in just a minute for sure.
yeah. And then the third is how I deliver it, right? So we have all been in training sessions with people who are just I don't know, not excited about it. So like I'm putting energy into this, right? I'm going to I am measuring my own neurologic immersion right now. And
Yeah,
like,
I'm
this
just
is
checking mine as
exciting.
we speak. Yeah.
Yeah, so immersion, neurologic immersion is contagious. If you have a trainer, a facilitator who's excited about what they're doing, that excitement extends to the learners. And you've got to have that level of engagement from the voice, from the energy, from the gestures of that person. So a lot of the reason we have repetitive, forgettable, and disconnected from performance is that we're not measuring or managing for high performance.
Well, let's actually get some chat going here. We're gonna ask a question. I'm gonna ask you personally, though, like, what's the best training that you actually remember? And please put your comments in the chat, and then Dr. Zach, I'm gonna ask you to respond to that. And I'll start with mine. Okay, so mine, I grew up as a computer scientist, and I distinctly remember a learning experience where a few friends of mine and I we basically reprogrammed the game Asteroids. Now that's going to age, like, tell me people how old I am, but that was immersive. I had a computer science teacher in my junior and senior year of high school that let us go, rather than do other work, build a game. And we were totally immersed in that. We would spend hours and hours building that, and it was completely immersive. But what's your best example of a training that you remember, and why you remember it? And then let's look at the chat too to see what people are saying in the chat.
Yeah, I mean, I remember once going to a conference in Key West, Florida, which is like not even connected to the US. If you've been to Key West, it's a wild place, you know. And
Yeah.
in December, with 16 people, like 15 me and 15 others, and it was extraordinary, focused exactly on the work I was doing, a build up both collaborations and friendships. And it was so intensive and you're so isolated that there were four or five people there that became very good friends and very strong collaborators. And so the setting really mattered and the focus on exactly the stuff I was working on at the time, which is why humans are ever good when no one's looking.
And what in with these things that are memorable, and there's some great stuff happening in the chat. What has happened in our brains that makes us remember that training?
Right. So what happens is that the content, again, the readiness, the structure, and the delivery are sufficiently focused on what's useful to me so that my brain will invest the resources to really absorb this information. So again, most information that we are getting now, the lights, this air conditioning, whatever we're hearing, our brain filters out because it's not relevant to our survival, and that brain needs to modulate that high energy overhead by just flushing out most things. So if I can create learning that's often, we'll talk about this later, Phil, participatory,
Sure.
that engages me in a real active way, then my brain will invest the resources so that I can get so much out of this. And for me, by the way, we should talk about liking a little bit. I don't care if you like it necessarily. I care that it's sunk into your brain
Sure.
so that on Monday you can use this information to do your job better, to create more value for your organization, right? That's the key measure of impact to me.
Yeah, we actually have a client that has stopped doing surveys about whether or not people like training because they know that some of the training that they do is intentionally uncomfortable because they're trying to train people to deal with uncomfortable situations. Let's start with a question, before we really get into, like, kind of your formula and practical tips. We're going to start with a question, but I want you to describe this question, because I think it has a deeper meaning than most people think. So the question is, to put in the chat, are you actually ready to learn? But Paul, you mentioned this before. Can you be more specific about what you mean when you say, are you ready to learn? So when people answer this, what are they actually saying?
Right. So we developed this physiologic measure we call psychological safety, which captures the amount of neural resources available to somebody to actually invest in acquiring information. And so you want people to be moderately uncomfortable, but have sufficient amount of resources to make that investment. So almost everything in biology has this inverted U curve where I need some physiologic arousal, some investment metabolically to acquire the information. But at the same time, I don't want to be so uncomfortable that I'm just trying to survive hanging on with my fingernails for the next 2 minutes, right? That's not adaptive. So there's this kind of sweet spot We don't have to be exactly on the peak of that inverted U, but I've got to get you focused on this is important now. I need you to do this thing now. And we'll talk about how we can do that versus if you don't do this, you're going to die, right? That's also not good. So, how do we craft experiences so that I get sufficient metabolic investment? You've got to be fully attentive and present so that you're ready to learn.
Okay, so if there are people on here, right, so the question, are you actually ready to learn? If there are people that right now, if they had to type the answer, they would say no. What would you tell them to do right now to get ready to for the next few slides where we're going to dive into some of the models that you've built and probably is the perfect time for them to learn for let's say 20 minutes or so.
Yeah, exactly right. So, one is you can actually get up. We'll wait for you. Do 3 laps around the room you're in and come back and get your heart rate up, right? Get focused on that.
Mm.
The second is, as you and I did, Phil, before we got on recording, is turn off all your other apps, right? My phone's off,
Yep.
my other apps on my computer are off. So attention, we have this nice phrase in English, paying attention. It is a real metabolic cost. You cannot split it. You can switch tasks, but there is no multitasking. You can be only on one task at a time. And so we're going to ask you now, if you're on here, to just focus on our task. If you want to get as much value out of this experience as possible, you've got to not look at your phone, not look at other apps, and actually attend to what we're doing.
All right, so here we go. People are ready to learn. They're even asking for bullet points. So here we go. We're going to now talk about some of your research specifically. So you've come up with a formula for what it means to truly create immersive learning. So can you talk us through like this I love this because I like math, right? But this is
Sure.
math like but talk to us about what you mean here and what the components of true immersive learning are and why they matter so much.
Right. So this came out of 20 years of research measuring changes in neurochemicals in which after an experience, people remembered or acted on it. So we looked at responders versus non-responders. So the attention to experience is driven by a neurochemical called dopamine, which binds to the prefrontal cortex and binds in lots of places, but particularly in the prefrontal cortex. So if you or your kids or someone you know has ADD or ADHD, the meds that are typically used for that, like Ritalin, Adderall, increase dopamine binding to the prefrontal cortex. That's why they increase attentional responses. And so, again, for people without ADHD or with it, you can actually focus yourself again by removing distractions, by focusing on the screen or the trainer or the learner or the computer program you're using to facilitate learning. So first is you've got to be attentive, right? That's table stakes. If I'm looking over here, Phil, I'm not going to have a good experience with you if I'm distracted. But the second is the content has got to generate value internally. And the way the brain assesses value is through emotions, right? It's got to feel like it's going to be valuable to me. So that feeling state is driven by another neurochemical called oxytocin. So oxytocin and dopamine interact with each other in fairly complex ways, nonlinear ways, but we can capture that with the six app with technology that shows second by second the value we're creating. So for trainers, this means I've got to actually, again, put energy into this. It's got to be something that not only sustains my attention, table stakes, but actually is important to me, right? It's got to be targeted on something I need. So whatever the most boring training is that we've all done, I don't know. I refuse
Foreign
to
Corrupt Practices Act or whatever yeah,
yeah.
bribery. Yeah.
Something. I refuse to do we're going to do the fire alarm and practice. I teach at a university. You're going to practice the fire drill. I'm like, no, I only have 15 hours a week or 15 hours a semester to teach you guys. If you can't get out of a two-story building during a fire, I'm sorry. I'm just going to I don't have time to lose half an hour of 15 hours total time with you to do a stupid drill. I mean, it's just interesting. So to me, that's just stupid. I'm just not going to do it. It's not valuable to me. But I tell the students, if you want to practice getting out of a two-story building, go for it. I'm going to keep lecturing, but you can do whatever you want to do. I don't care.
Yeah.
But to me, that's a
Yeah.
really boring training because it's not useful, right? It's not, no one
Yeah.
has thought about, is this valuable to that organism? But if I'm telling you about how to use Gen AI, or I'm telling you how to do your job better, or how to land more sales, Okay, and if I'm a salesperson, that's valuable to me, right? So it's got to be really targeted and delivered in a way that creates that emotional resonance. So for trainers, there is a lot of difficulty here. You're breaking through the desire of the brain to idle. So you've got to sustain attention and sustain the emotional value of that experience. It's not easy to do, and that's why a lot of training fails.
So I'm actually the comments have a really good question that was we're not prepared for at all. So I'm going to throw it at you anyway, Dr. Zach,
Sure.
which is uh, how does this relate to what people call learning in the flow of work? Is this different than learning in the flow of work because in that you do have distractions and you may not have the attention, or like can you talk a little bit about that? Sorry to spring one on you, but I thought it was a great
That's a
question.
great question. Yeah, and I've done hundreds of talks like this, never had such a good question. So bravo to you for asking that question. Uh, the downside of learning the flow of work is that you may be distracted. The upside is it's totally practical. You need this now, right? I'm doing this
Mm.
thing. I go, holy crap, how do I figure this out? So it generates that emotional commitment that you need to actually absorb this information and categorize it in your brain so you can use it not only now, but later. So I think learning the flow of work is a really essential way if you can sustain attention to learn new skills.
So even if the attention goes down a little bit, the emotional resonance actually might be higher, and therefore you end up with you still end up in an immersive state.
Well, yeah. So I'm going to follow up on that real quickly. So attention is kind of a zero
Yeah.
variable. It's like the
Okay.
multitasking. Either I'm attending here or attending there. So as long as I'm attending to what I'm doing, then I don't have to worry about variations of attention. It's just I'm either attending or not. It's that emotional response. And when you need this information, when it's compelling, you get, and so emotional response is a continuous variable, not a binary variable. So I'm going to have a lot more commitment when I need this now. That's why deadlines are really useful. A project deadline or a deadline
Mhm.
to do anything, because they focus our attention and our emotional resonance on, I need this now. I've got to actually invest the resources.
That's great. All right, so let's make this practical. Let's talk about your research here and the rule that you call the 20-20-20 rule. Um, Talk us through the research behind this and what you mean by each of the 20s in this rule.
Right. So, as I mentioned earlier, Accenture has found that by measuring immersion over many, many years and many trainings, that about every 20 minutes, you've got to actually change tasks. So that could be a facilitator sets up what our training is going to be, and then we do table work for 20 minutes, and then we debrief for 20 minutes. And so thinking about how to do that is really important. So the first thing is I've got to open hot. Right? If I want to capture the attention, which precedes the emotional resonance, then I've got to actually give you a reason why we're here. So a lot of trainings I've been to, and probably you've been to, Phill, the trainers are so nice and they're talking softly and I just want to go to sleep, and my head rolls back. Open hot. It's like, hey, we got 4 hours together. We got to get some stuff done. This is going to be hard ass. We need you now. I need you to be into this
Yeah.
thing. So if we look at Hollywood movies, they all open hot because Hollywood has learned this. So trainers should learn this too. Open hot. Don't open soft, right? I'm already here. I showed up. Give me some
Yeah.
value right away. So first thing is open hot right away, and then think about tasks changing every 20 minutes or so. So you have seconds, but it should be minutes here. So
One
um,
sec.
yeah, that's all right. And so, what we see for best practice, if I'm giving a keynote for an hour, I'm going to mix in videos, I'm going to mix in polls, I'm going to mix in audience questions, I'm going to switch it up so that don't have a chance to reduce that emotional value I'm creating here. So, capture attention and then create value as soon as you can. And how do you create value? Often it's by storytelling, right? We are great at illustrating or sharing information through a story that has an emotional component. Here is a client or here is a colleague that faced this crisis, right? They had to deliver this thing and they couldn't do it. And let me tell you how they resolved that. So we have found that that narrative arc, that structure of stories is one of the most effective ways to sustain neurologic immersion. So I would say lead with a story when you open up training.
So let me ask just a very biomechanical neuroscience level, like what are you saying happens to the brain at 20 minutes? Are dopamine levels? drop or oxy
Uh,
like what's the neurological change there?
Yeah, so we see both this reduction of dopamine and oxytocin that only bind. So those are binding to receptors. Those are working at millisecond frequency, but that activation of the receptors degrades because there are neurochemicals, enzymes that suck out the neurochemical from their receptor, and so these effects neurochemically or neuroelectrically will last roughly about 20 minutes before these systems degrade and need a reset. And that reset could be as simple as a stand up and stretch. And so when I
Yeah.
teach in our class, I will put some kind of interstitial change in there, right? We're just going to do a task change. And that could be asking questions. It could be looking at a video. So I'm really thinking about that reset. And it doesn't have to be very long. It could just be a couple of minutes is enough to give me that neurologic breather. And then I can reset and restart the dopamine and oxytocin effects.
I hope there are lots of learning geeks on here. I think there are, like you and I, because we're getting into the weeds, but I love it. And actually, we're going to do that right now. It's been 24 minutes by my clock, but we're going to switch to a live poll here really quick. So if we can activate the live poll here, here's the question: does your company already have highly engaging and immersive training? Um, Choose your answer. I'm a host. I'm not allowed to vote, so these are going to be your responses. But we're going to leave this open just for a minute. But while we're doing that, um, Paul, I think we know the answer to this is going to be that most people think their training is not highly immersive.
Mhm.
Why do you think that's the case? Like why do people really struggle to build this immersive training and immersive learning programs for um, their teams?
Yeah, I think a lot of this, and I think of this in my teaching at university level, that we're still using these medieval methods, which is a person standing in front of the room talking at us, right? We're not actually doing participatory learning. We're not using computer simulations. We're not using, boy, look at those poll results. Yeah, you were right
Yeah,
on.
look at that. Wow.
Yeah.
Congratulations to those 10% that really have nailed it. That's
Yeah, I
awesome.
want to find out who they are and what they're doing. So I'd be very interested. And so I think that this notion that we need a teacher to share information with us in the first off, people just don't, it's just not an effective way to learn. It can be an effective way to learn, but generally it's not when learning is participatory, when it's a workshop. So I haven't seldom lecture anymore for the last 10 years or more. My classes are workshops. I want you to do the work to acquire the information before we get in there. And then we're going to dig into it, tear it apart, understand it, do peer-to-peer learning, do simulations, do all kinds of ways that allow us to dig in and really absorb the material as opposed to just memorize it.
Yeah, makes total sense to me. All right, so let's talk about these dimensions. So at ETU, we do simulations, so we're all about immersive learning. If we do our jobs right and build great simulations with our clients, we hit these things. So let's talk about like the three components, and you've hit on these a little bit already, but I want you to go a little bit deeper. And also let's geek out a little bit. Let's talk about what's happening in the brain when we create these the environment with these three factors. All right,
Yeah.
I'm gonna let you take it for a minute here.
Of course, yeah, and I'd love to have you tell us more about how you do at ETU as well. Yeah, the first step is got to make you comfortable. So oftentimes, even though I want to open hot, I do want to build in breaks so that people can use the bathroom, get a cup of coffee, and even network a little bit. So we think and it's a normal thing, right? So when Phil and I got on, we were chit-chatting before we started. That's what humans do. We're social creatures. From a training perspective, that's really useful because now we're going to share information about what we're about to do or what we have done. And I think that's an important way to reinforce the material. So
There's
I
also
want
some
you to be comfortable.
expectation setting there, right? Like if you did it at the beginning, like people are setting expectations. This is what I'm expecting out of this situation.
Yeah, exactly. And I want to make sure that I'm not rushing you in too much so that you have a chance again to hydrate, to use the restroom. So make people comfortable. And then I'm going to open hot, as we mentioned, right? Let's get going right away. So I've got you in the room. You've sat down. You want something to happen. I need to actually deliver on that promise, right? And that could be start with a poll. That could be start with a movie. That could be so in my classes, which are really are workshops, I often will start with a video, right? So instead of having me talking, I'm going to have someone else talking, hopefully a highly neurologically immersive video that's going to set the stage and give them a different view than what I'm going to talk about. And then we can react to that. And then we'll dig in. What did this video say? Do you buy this? Was this person reasonable? So I'm going to change that structure of the content so that I'm doing this kind of every 20-minute switches thoughtfully. And then super users like the guys at Accenture in their L&D group, they will actually measure immersion in real time. And so that's a super user play. And when they see this drop off, then they can go, okay, we're only at 15 minutes, but most of the learners here are actually checked out. Let's build in a break. So surprisingly, Accenture has found they need to put longer breaks in. So the punchline here is short intensive learning is going to be more memorable, more valuable than longer extended learning. So short, just like working out. Intensive, take a little break, recover. Intensive, take a break and recover.
So you can't, we couldn't take 20 20 20 and make it 40 40 40. That wouldn't work, right? It wouldn't work as
Yeah.
well.
And what's nice is
It-
this is not, I didn't find this, Accenture did and shared it with me. So yeah, it looks like it's very difficult to sustain both the attention and the emotional resonance for more than about 20 minutes. As we mentioned earlier, that's consistent with the neuroscience on the activation of these pathways in the brain, that neurons fatigue just like muscles fatigue when you're working out. And so if I think about that neurologic fatigue, now neurons are working at millisecond frequencies, so they recover fast. So their recovery can be just a couple of minutes. And so, yeah, think about putting in exercises or putting in, again, a poll, a movement, having someone speak, doing Q&A. So that switch up is fine because now I'm like, okay, now my brain's got to kick in a different gear. I'm going to go through neutral, take a breath, which is fine.
Yeah, so let's talk about immersive learning specifically. Like, and let's get some more action here in the chat. Which format of content is the most effective for immersive learning? In-person coaching, face-to-face, e-learning, reading content. Let's while we're getting some reactions in the chat, let me ask you, Paul, like what? Let's take a specific example. Face-to-face training. Most people would think that face-to-face training is the most immersive form of training. Um, what does the science say about that? Like, is face-to-face the most immersive, the most effective, or is it situational? Like how? What does the science say behind that?
Right, and we published research on this that people can find online if they Google me. We have found that when people are shoulder to shoulder, learners are next to each other in a room, that you have this contagion effect where you're able to sustain neurologic immersion for a longer period of time. And so there is a real reason to have people together. And that could be for discussions, it could be for doing participatory learning tasks, table work, using technology. So physical is very good. Um, Again, subject to those three dimensions, right? Readiness,
Yeah.
the content delivery, and the delivery of that and the structure of the content. So again, holding those stable across the different environments. So I think it's actually really valuable to have people in the same room. Again, because we have this sort of contagion effect where it's harder to goof off. It's harder to be distracted when people are there, and then we pick up the energy literally from other people. The second is that when anything is active, so simulations, something where I have to actually devote enough metabolic energy to get this done. So a win-win would be a simulation with other people, right? That would be the epitome of really effective learning. Webinars like this, virtual trainings, not bad, right? Because
Yeah.
Phill, you and I are very exciting. Let's be honest. This is
That's right.
it's
Yeah. No.
amazing.
Well, I haven't checked my app yet, but yeah, we're
Okay, let
doing
me check
okay. We're
mine
doing
and see
okay.
how I'm doing. I'm actually really
Um,
high, so I'm up
all
there.
right. You're a
I'm
little bit
having a
ahead of
great
me, but that's
time.
okay. Yeah.
Right. So
Okay.
again,
So
it is
let me
enjoy.
ask you.
Go ahead.
Let me ask this. So face to face, there are times though where face to face, like people, if they don't get that psychological safety, like we actually have some people that say simulations or other things. There are certain scenarios where it actually helps to be in a non-real world environment because of the social safety element of this or the social psychological safety element of that. So simulations are another form of that. There are other types of content. So I mean, I realize it's very situational, and there's some great stuff happening in the chat here. I'm actually going to have to go back and read all of the chat after all this is done because there's just some really good comments in here. But yeah, I love the idea of face to face when you can and being shoulder to shoulder. I love lots of comments about simulations, lots of comments about gamification, which I think there's some elements of gamification that fit really nicely in your three pillars of learning there. So I think there's a lot of ways to get it done. There's also just the element of scale, right? I mean, it's not possible to get everybody in a room shoulder to shoulder every time, right? So we often are trying to do the best we can with the scale that we have. So I think all of those things have to come into play. Okay,
Hey,
so
Phil, I'm
yeah, go
actually
ahead.
curious. Do you create simulations that have multiple people in the same experience?
Right. We haven't done a lot of those yet. We are seeing more and more of that, especially as we move into using AI and synthetic media and synthetic avatars. It's going to be easier to do some of that. So, yeah, I think that's a really interesting way to approach some of the new simulations that we're working on today. So, all right, let's talk about delivery of information. Like, let's talk about peak immersive phase. Like, what is the best time to deliver high impact information? What's the science and what's happening in our brain at that moment? And how do people know that? If that maybe, obviously, if they're using the app, they could use that. But like, what are other ways that trainers or facilitators can find that peak moment when now's the time to really dive in?
Right. So particularly if I'm using a story structure to share information, and it could be technical information that starts with a human scale story, a client or a colleague or someone who actually needs and uses this information. If I add to that the technical components of that, after this kind of emotional peak of a story structure, we're going to have better information recall. So there's kind of a halo effect we get from peak immersion experiences in which when I'm really highly emotionally engaged by this, my brain will carry that over to the next thing that happens. So this is exactly how marketing works, right? Marketing, we tell a little story and then I say buy my stuff or remember my brand. So I think we can use the same approach with learning. That is, I want to have this emotionally compelling component and then say, here's what you need to do, or here's the key takeaway. So uh, just to be very clear, the correlation between immersion and information recall weeks later is around zero point 0.6, so very strong positive correlation. That means if I can create the most effective learning happening at a point of high emotionality, then I'm going to remember that information better.
And
So
what would a normal score if you're in a non-immersive moment be? I mean, is it approaching zero?
yeah, yeah. So the baseline for just daily living is a little below. So state are normalized around 0 to 100, so a little below 50.
Yeah,
So something like 35 or 40. So zero means that I'm here, but I just hate what's happening. So I call that a
yeah. I'm
frustration
checked
moment.
out.
Yeah, yeah. I'm
Yeah.
checked out. I didn't do not want to be here anymore. So, but kind of normal baseline is between 30 and 40 for most people. And so if I see, immersion scores of 65, 70, 75, that's amazing. Just as an example, I teach a class on this, and we did a walkthrough at IKEA, the big Swedish, store, to look at, what does the experience look like because it's a curated experience. And the average over that hour across my entire class that I took with was in the 90s because people just loved it. It was such a compelling experience. So I think
What
that,
was it for the people that got lost? I usually get lost, and maybe
well,
that
there
would
were
probably at
arrows.
least,
You don't
yeah,
follow
yeah.
arrows. So
I mean, there are big arrows, but I get sidetracked in IKEA, and I just end up eating meatballs. So yeah. So
that's not bad.
but they maintained an average of 90 on an immersive score inside of it. So I mean, no wonder IKEA has grown the way it has. I mean, that's brilliant marketing, product positioning, all that type of stuff. And so we need to think in those same types of ways as we're designing learning.
but it is curated, right? And there are a bunch of changes. So I'm going from the living room
Yeah,
area to the bedroom area. And so you're getting these natural kind of changes. And the class and I are talking the entire time. So it's that in-person sharing. We're going through an experience together, right? And that could have been a simulation. It could have been VR. Oh, can we deviate on VR for 90 seconds, Phil? May I?
of course.
So
Of course.
literally last week, we published an article in a peer-reviewed paper looking at VR education, which is, entering the educational field versus this 2D, like what we're in right now. And we found this is for nursing education. Not only was VR neurologically more immersive, more peak immersion experiences in VR in this. This is a video of a patient journey,
Mm.
longish video, I think around 6.5 minutes. So more information was acquired. There was greater greater self-reported empathy for that patient in the VR experience than the 2D. And we had a behavioral component. We asked people, because now we had engaged them emotionally, if they would sign up to help a student with a project that was happening next week. And we had more volunteers in the VR condition than in the 2D condition. So I think we should really address these new technologies that can be very compelling to help information get into and stick in our brains.
Yeah. So just there's a bunch of questions in the this just so that everybody knows. We're going to curate a list of some of the articles that Dr. Zach mentioned, and that'll go out with the follow-up materials so that we have all of that. So don't worry, we'll make sure you have the research. Okay, let's get practical here and let's talk about a couple of different types of training that probably a lot of people on here have to deliver. And what would you do to make them more immersive, or what are some very practical steps? So let's talk about mandatory training and onboarding, which I think is one that, you know, I don't want to make up a percentage here, but a large number of companies probably do this relatively poorly, or at least their employees think they do it poorly because it's considered mandatory. It's probably considered boring. It's kind of repetitive. Um, what are ways that people can take mandatory training, compliance training, and onboarding, and use these principles to make it more immersive, more effective, and to make it really resonate and turn into action?
Yeah, I
Give us
think
some
there's,
tips and tricks.
yeah, I think best practice, I'm going to draw on what Accenture has done. So Accenture does about 40% of their onboarding now in VR. So you're hired by Accenture. They send you a VR headset and they send you a wearable so you can measure your immersion. So they're addressing whether you're actually acquiring the information effectively. And so they'll do about 40% of that onboarding in VR. So you're at home, you haven't physically, you've been to the office because you've, been checked in, you've filled out all of your employment forms. But that VR allows you to be in different offices, right? If you're Accenture, you're going to be moving around generally, right? You're a consultant. And so that VR training is really interesting. I was at the Accenture headquarters in New York City and Hudson Yards recently, and one of the folks I met with, who's a senior managing director, said, "Oh, I know this building because I've been in it so many times in VR. I've never been here before, but I actually know where the coffee machine is and where the restrooms are and whatever because I've been in this building so many times in VR." So I think sometimes we think of advanced technologies as a toy or an amusement, but what we're finding is neurologically, you get very high immersion, partially from the novelty, but also because you can actually put much more into this simulation of what you're going to be doing as a job in a very controlled setting, but you can still choose your own adventure in the VR world, right? You can go back, you can do it again, and it works at scale. And Phil, you mentioned the scale effects, which I think is increasingly
Yeah.
important because it's so expensive to fly everyone into New York or wherever to get this done. So I think that's a
Well,
really
it's especially expensive to fly people into New York, but yes, you're
anywhere,
right.
right?
It's
And so
anywhere.
now I still think we want to be together at some point because we've shown that shoulder to shoulder is a great way to learn. I think it's
Yeah.
going to be harder for mandatory training. I don't think I have a great sense of best practice. If I have to do the sexual harassment training or whatever that is year after year, and it's the same. So that's where we need to mix it up, right? Not even have a facilitator. It could be online. It could be do it differently. So again, the brain loves the new thing, and to the extent that I can mix things up and change it and make even mandatory training unexpected, then I'm going to get greater comprehension and greater enjoyment out of this. By the way, I should say that even though we talked about liking in the very beginning, I don't care if you like it or not. We do see a positive correlation between immersion and the enjoyment of the experience. So that also is nice. It's a nice to have. I think it's not a need to have, but it's nice that also you get to enjoy it.
All right, let's try one more example. Sales, leadership, training that's more soft skills. Both answer in the chat, but also your thoughts, Dr. Zach, on what are some ways that we can make these types of training that I'm guessing a lot of people on the call have to build and deliver this type of training. How do we make that better?
Yeah, I think the what I've seen from Accenture, I may be NDA'd. Accenture's been very cool about let me use their name, but lots of other professional services organizations that use our technology. So I'm going to draw from their data that they've shared with me. Uh, is really practice. So learn something and do it and then get feedback. And the feedback we often get, which is fine, is do I think this was good to the audience? Did I think this, I did this well? Um, but also getting neurologic feedback, right? So what I've seen Accenture do with sales training is train these people, have them give the pitch to an audience of their peers, and then actually look at the neurologic immersion of the audience, and then have that trainer go, okay, this was a 7 minute pitch, and in minute five, everyone was tuned out. So let's just do that again. Let's talk about in real time right now,
Yep.
constant. So that real tight feedback loop is really nice, and it gets away from that. Well, they didn't like me, or that trainer was mean. Like, let's just look at the data, right? It's objective data. Immersion data is coming from the old evolutionary old parts of the brain. You can't fake it. Either this pitch worked or it didn't. And so I think that's really important. And from a leadership perspective, we have a lot of executive coaches using our tech. And again, it gets that skepticism is removed when you actually see the real data. So here's a leadership meeting, a meeting with your direct reports that you held, and we actually just measured their neurologic immersion. And it was a 25. People were checked out. We saw very
Yeah.
interesting data, by the way, Phil, during the COVID lockdown times, when I'm sure I'm NDA'd on this, but anyway, large tech companies that you would know that you use every day on your computer,
Sure.
uh, we saw great variation in their online team meetings. These are 1 hour team meetings, generally on Mondays, met with their team members. And a lot of this was that contagion effect. We saw that towards the end of those meetings, leaders who were stressed, who were hurried, who felt pressure, uh, shared that pressure with their team members, and you saw immersion go down because like, okay, you guys, let's get down. They're talking too fast, they're too stressed out, and that high stress inhibits neurologic immersion, which is interesting, right? So again,
Yeah, of
we're
course.
others all the time. We're absorbing their emotional energy.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna just real quick here. Let's do a check here. If you're live, put your score in the chat. I was actually I was immersed. I was at upper 80s, lower 90s. Now I'm in the mid 70s. If you're open to it and you're trying it, put yours in the chat. Dr. Zach, where are you at on your immersion score right now?
I was consistently in the 80-85 realm. I've dropped a little now. I got two key moments in the last hour. So key moments are these really valuable, high value moments
All
that the
right, so
app
we've done
shows you.
okay.
So yeah,
So all of this is actually tying into some questions that have come up throughout this. So like we're pretty much done here. We do want to encourage people to try ETU as a sponsor of this. Try a simulation. Maybe try it while you're using the wearable and see how it works. But there are some questions that have come that I think you're going to find really interesting. So there's a couple questions about the 20-20-20 rule,
yeah.
and is it different in different situations? So is it still 20-20-20 if you're not face to face? If you're online, is that number lower? And then there's another question about age. And I can say as I'm going to jump the science here. I have 9-year-old triplets and a 12-year-old. I can tell you, uh, they can't hold attention for 20 minutes. So I think age, I can call the age one myself without doing any research at all, just through my life. Kids, it's not 20 minutes. It's probably less than half that. But maybe your response both to age and then also format. Does that number go down in an online setting? Does it have to go down, or does it go down because we don't do a good job with it?
Yeah, great. Also, two great questions. Thank you for whoever put those in there, and God bless you to have triplets. I can't believe it. Uh, yeah, online data from Accenture shows that the cutoff is about 12 minutes, right? So if I'm doing online, I want
So
to do, again,
60%
yeah, so
of what it would
think
be.
think of this as a task switch, right? You don't have to stop online. But again, if you're doing an hour online, you may want to put a real break in, get up and move around a little bit. So again, sitting, you're reducing that physiologic tone if you're sitting. So if I'm moving around, right, I'm going to raise that heart rate, raise that focus. So think about 12 minutes if it's online before a task change. And then for children, yeah, of course, it's much earlier, much
Well, and
shorter.
the question there's a second question on that. That what about elderly? What about people that are older? Does it change over time in the other direction? Do we know?
Oh, that's a great question. So we have data up to people who are 75, and we actually see on average, increased immersion in the same experience as people age. It's a positive trend line. It's fairly flat, but actually increases. And the reason seems to be better emotional regulation, right? That we are
Hmm.
less
Okay.
freaked out about my wife or my dog or my kids, and we can actually just expend the metabolic energy. So I think the reasons for that are still, not completely determined, but age is a benefit in terms of being able to acquire new information. And that's really very new research, which is good for all of us with gray hair, right?
Well, I'm getting there myself, but again, I have 9-year-old triplets and a 12-year-old, so I'm graying very quickly now. Let me try a couple of other questions here. There's some great questions. Keep them coming. What what if I really need somebody to pay attention for more than 20 minutes? Like for whatever the topic is that intense, or I've got more than content than that, and I need to extend that, both as a trainer and as the participant. What can I do to maintain that focus and to maintain the throughput that I need to actually to retain it?
Right. So again, I teach 3-hour classes, and so but I'm switching every 20 minutes. So it's really just task switching. So to the extent that that learning can be participatory, and this is where having people either physically together or virtually together works, I can ask, "Hey Bob, give us your view on this topic," or "How did you answer this question?" Because again, you've done the work in advance. You've done some pre-work. So share your screen with us. Show us how you created this piece of content. And so that ability to go, okay, Bob's doing something, right? I've kind of acclimated to the Paul Zach voice, who's my facilitator, and then someone else is coming in. So he just has that again, that new thing that kicks in those neural resources.
By the way, both in the chat and the questions, you've got a lot of people that are aging that are cheering your research results on it.
My
So
people.
it's yeah, we're all there together. What? Okay, another really good question in the questions. What about situations where either you can't use the tech, right? And we've talked a little bit about your app, but like how can trainers, facilitators, how can they gauge immersion and know, like, I mean, obviously the 20 rule, they could just set a timer and say, hey, at 20 minutes, I got to make a change. But
Right.
how do you read the room, or and how do you do that in a virtual setting as well, when not everybody's going to have a wearable on, or they're not going to have the same wearable on, and you're not going to have that data?
Correct. Yeah, exactly. So uh, you look for those tells of uncomfortableness. So part of that could be rustling of papers. It could be moving of feet. It could be where people are looking. So people have done a lot of presentations like you and I have, Phil. You start to read the room as well. And so from a facilitator perspective, again, you want to change the task. So I remember giving when I was in book tour, my first book in 2012. I was in Brazil. Uh, for some reason, I go to Brazil a lot. They like me there. And I remember I gave a talk in Porto Alegre, which is in the south. Killed
Yeah.
it. Next night I was in Sao Paulo. It was a rainy day, and I just couldn't get that audience with me. And I heard a lot of rustling, and so I just stopped my presentation and I went to the instead of being in the middle of the stage, I went to the front of the stage and I started talking to people. I'm like, because people were not with me, and the audience, the auditorium was half full. It was just a cold, rainy day in Sao Paulo, so no one wanted to go out, and so there wasn't that shoulder to shoulder energy that I had the night before, where everyone was there, and you had this again sort of contagion. So I'm going to stop. I'm going to mix it up. I'm going to go. I'm going to go to the back of the room. I've taught from the back of the room before. Like I'll do whatever it takes. I'll stand on a desk. I don't care what it is. I need you to kick in that this is important. So really make that change.
Okay, a couple other questions from these really good questions. Please keep them coming. We've got probably 2 or 3 more minutes here. If I don't have wearables, if I don't have I can't measure it in real time, is there a way, and is it valuable to measure immersion after the fact? Is there some way that you can test that after the fact and then maybe course correct for the next session?
Yeah, that's a great question. You could measure it during and then look at the data afterwards, right? So
Sure.
it's just a QR code. It's free for users. I think the premium version is like $12 a month. Like, it's basically free. So yeah, I think that's probably best practice. If you're not a super user and being a facilitator and looking at this data in real time is very tough because it takes you out of your job.
Yeah, that's slow. Yeah.
Addressing that. We have a lot of people in the events industry who will do that. They will actually address that data afterwards or look at it and then come back to their clients and go, hey, here's what worked, here's what didn't. Our keynote from 11 to 12, actually, that kind of fell flat. So next year, when we
Sure.
do your conference, we're going to do something different. We'll have a different keynote speaker, or we'll not have a keynote, or we'll do a experiential learning topic.
Okay, interesting. And what about if you don't have, again, the no wearables scenario? Is there some questions that you can ask? Is there a post evaluation that you found that is that could provide some useful insights, even if it's not, bio and neuroscience based?
Yeah, I'm very skeptical of the smiley face ones because people lie
Yeah,
because they're nice, right? Like, I don't
yeah,
want to say that your baby's ugly or that my trip to Miami wasn't fun. I think for me, the best indicators after a training event are information recall. So I really encourage everybody to just assess, could be 3 questions, right? What did we learn about A, B, and C? And if information recall is high, then you're probably doing a good job.
yeah. I mean, the smiley face one really gets me when it's at the exit to the bathroom and you've got to hit one of them with your hand, and I'm like, how many people have hit this that haven't washed their hands? Like, it just seems
Exactly.
like a that
It's
just
all
seems like a
over.
really bad one, right? But yeah. Well, listen, this has been really great as always. I feel like I've learned a lot. I hope that everybody on the call has learned a lot. We hope that you'll try a simulation with us. We also have, we're going to be at DevLearn. If you're going to be at DevLearn, put it in the chat that you're going to be in DevLearn. We want to know that you're going to be there. We want to invite you to our booth. We're going to be giving away free copies of Dr. Zach's book, Immersion, which is great, by the way. It's not just about learning, it's about immersion overall and how it affects your happiness. But if you're going to be at DevLearn, stop by. ETU is going to have a big presence there, and we would love to see you. We'd love to talk more about what we do with simulations and immersive learning. But Dr. Zach, any closing thoughts or comments about that can help people take this back and make it practical?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing I missed, thank you, Phil, and it was a pleasure to be here with everybody and great questions, is have fun, right? If you love it as a facilitator, you're going to get a big impact. So without measuring, without anything, just have a ball.
Yeah, great. And I'm closing at an 84 is my final score here as we wrap up. So I feel pretty good about that. So thank you, Dr. Zach. Thank you to all of you who spent some time with us today.